My name is Jenna Whitaker. I'm 31 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the black sheep of my family. Last night, I stood in my parents' living room at their 60th wedding anniversary, surrounded by cousins, uncles, aunts, people who barely remembered I existed unless they needed a story to roll their eyes at. My older sister, Lauren, stood in the center like a debutante, sipping wine and holding court. She spotted me in my uniform and tilted her head. "Oh, wow," she said loudly, enough for the whole room to hear. "Did you come dressed as G.I. Jane for the occasion?" Laughter echoed. My mother chuckled. Someone snorted into their drink, and I just stood there, hands calm around my glass, smile unmoved. I've learned that silence, when used right, can cut sharper than words. Because not the 10 seconds later, the front door opened. The room quieted as polished black boots stepped onto the tile. And then, like a scene from a movie, Major General Raymond Cole, yes, that Raymond Cole, walked in, scanned the crowd, locked eyes with me, and stood at full attention. He raised his right hand. "Lieutenant Colonel Whitaker," he said firmly. "Ma'am, it's an honor." And that, right there, was the moment everything turned. Growing up in the Whitaker house meant fitting into a very specific mold. My sister Lauren fit perfectly. She was all ribbons and charm, ballet recitals and Sunday brunch smiles. She played piano, won spelling bees, and always wore pastels. My mother called her our little ambassador, the golden child, the effortless daughter. And then there was me. I was the one who took apart the toaster just to see how it worked, the one who read maps instead of fairy tales, who wore cargo pants to church and asked for a telescope instead of a diary. I wasn't rebellious. I was curious. But in my family, curiosity without makeup was seen as defiance. I still remember the day I told my parents I wanted to apply to West Point. My dad blinked. My mom looked like I'd said I wanted to join a biker gang. "Sweetheart," she said slowly, folding a dish towel in her lap, "the Army is for boys who don't have other options. You're a girl, you're smart, be a teacher, or marry well." I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I just applied anyway, got in on a full scholarship, packed my bags without ceremony. No one came to my graduation. Lauren had a conference in Tampa. My parents sent a card that said, "Stay safe." That's what it was like, growing up invisible while your sister glowed like a sunrise. Lauren loved to remind people I was a bit intense, that I always took things too seriously. She'd toss it out casually at family gatherings, usually after telling some childhood story that made me sound like a robot in combat boots. The worst part wasn't what she said. It was how easily people believed it. They nodded, laughed, sipped their wine. It became a quiet family joke. Jenna, the strange one. The soldier who never smiled. But the truth is, I smiled plenty. Just not at people who didn't see me. Over the years, I learned how to shrink myself without disappearing. I sent birthday cards, even when mine went forgotten. I called on holidays, listened patiently as my mother talked about Lauren's new position, new dress, new boyfriend, new anything. I stayed silent when she asked why I never called more often. And every time I came home, I saw the same look on my mother's face, polite disappointment, as if I were a guest in a house where I'd grown up, wearing the wrong clothes, speaking the wrong language. Still, I kept going. Not for their approval, but because somewhere deep down, I hoped. I hoped one day they'd look at me and see more than a uniform. That they'd say my name without that edge of confusion. That they'd realize I didn't join the Army to rebel. I joined because I believed in something bigger than myself. But belief doesn't always buy you a seat at the family table. Sometimes it just gives you the strength to build your own. 6 years. That's how long it had been since I last stepped foot in that house. Dad had called me 3 weeks before the anniversary. His voice was softer than I remembered, almost cautious. "Your mother's planning something big," he said. 60 years married, she wants everyone there." I didn't answer right away. I pictured the house, the floral wallpaper, the laughter that always paused a half-second too long when I walked in. "You think she wants me there?" I asked. He hesitated. "I think it would mean something, to me at least." That was enough. So I flew in from DC on a Friday, my dress uniform pressed, shoes shining like mirrors. I didn't tell anyone I'd made lieutenant colonel last spring. Didn't mention the classified operations or the joint briefings at the Pentagon. I knew they wouldn't ask. They never did. I arrived 10 minutes early. The house looked smaller, like someone had pressed it into itself. The garden was still manicured within an inch of its life. Mother's pride. I walked up the steps, straightened my jacket, and rang the doorbell. Lauren opened the door. She blinked once, then smiled that tight, performative smile she'd mastered in every school yearbook photo. "Look who showed up," she said, stepping aside. "Nice costume." I ignored the jab. I'd learned long ago that answering only made her dig deeper. Instead, I stepped inside, nodded politely to the sea of familiar faces that turned toward me with mild surprise, and headed for the table where the drinks were lined up like trophies. The room smelled like pot roast and nostalgia. People made small talk. Someone asked me if I was still doing that army thing. I said yes. Another relative, Aunt Clara, I think, asked if I'd ever seen combat. Her tone light, like she was asking about a new recipe. "Once or twice," I said. Lauren was holding court by the fireplace, retelling a story about her school district's new award for leadership. She was now the youngest principal in her region, and she made sure everyone knew it. Her voice rose with practiced inflection. People clapped at the right moments. Then she looked over at me. "And here's Jenna," she said, motioning casually. "Still keeping America safe from paperclips and bad coffee, I presume?" Laughter followed, not loud, but sharp. I smiled, small, unbothered. I took another sip of my drink and said nothing, because I wasn't here to be right. I wasn't here to be recognized. I was here to witness something, to stand still and let time pass through me without flinching. It's funny, the power of silence. People confuse it with weakness. But sometimes silence is the space where you let people show who they truly are. And they were showing me. Every raised eyebrow, every half-joke dressed in politeness, every glance at my uniform followed by a dismissive shrug. They didn't know that earlier that week, I'd been in a secure facility reviewing threat profiles for 3 federal agencies. They didn't know that General Cole had personally commended me for identifying a breach no one else caught. They didn't know, and frankly, they didn't care. Lauren was the story they liked to tell. I was the page they'd skipped long ago. But I wasn't here to rewrite anything. I was just waiting for the next chapter to begin. Dinner was winding down. The roast had been picked over, the green beans cold, and someone started pouring coffee into mismatched mugs that hadn't seen daylight in years. I was on my second glass of water, mostly to keep my hands busy. Conversations buzzed around the room like static. Lauren's school board position, Aunt Clara's arthritis, some cousin's new house in the suburbs. And then, without warning, Lauren cleared her throat. "Do you all remember that time Jenna cut off all her hair in 8th grade because she wanted to train like a Navy SEAL?" I looked up slowly. Her smile was wide, her eyes locked on mine. "Oh, come on," she said, turning to the room. "Don't pretend you don't remember. She used to crawl through the backyard in camouflage. Mom thought she was having some kind of crisis." A few people chuckled. My mother shook her head and added, "We were worried she was going to grow up feral. I mean, God knows I tried to raise her right." More laughter. My uncle slapped his knee. Even Dad looked down into his mug. I felt it, like a dull blade pressing into the space just beneath my ribs. The slow, practiced dissection of a daughter they never understood. And worse, never wanted to. "She never even wrote to us when she was deployed," my mother said, with that familiar note of theatrical sadness. "Lauren always kept us updated, sent pictures. Jenna just vanished." That wasn't true. I had written, I'd sent emails, called when I could. But when no one answered 3 times in a row, you stop dialing. When the only reply to your Christmas card is silence, you start thinking maybe silence is the language they prefer. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. Lauren wasn't done. "She missed Mom's birthday 3 years in a row," she said, voice pitched perfectly for the table. "We didn't even know where she was last Thanksgiving. I had to explain to everyone that my sister was probably off chasing terrorists in the desert, or whatever she does." The way she said "my sister" sounded more like an insult than a bond. I sat still, my hands in my lap, my breathing slow. I wasn't humiliated. I was exhausted. This wasn't new. This was just louder. They needed me to be the joke so Lauren could be the applause. I was the shadow she danced in front of. I looked across the table at my father. He didn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the centerpiece, pretending it was interesting. A part of me, the younger version, the one who still sent cards, wanted to get up and scream, to list my achievements, to tell them that I'd spoken to a 4-star general last week, that I had a clearance level they couldn't spell, that while they were busy gossiping over pot roast, I was reviewing threats to the very infrastructure they took for granted. But the adult version of me, the woman in the uniform, the one who'd buried comrades and read classified briefings at 2 a.m., she just took another sip of water. Because in that moment, I realized something. You don't have to prove anything to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And they were. It was almost poetic, the way it happened. Lauren was in mid-sentence, recounting how she'd single-handedly turned around the culture of underperformance at her school. When the doorbell rang, she paused, slightly annoyed at the interruption. My mother turned to my father. "Can you get that, dear?" Before he could stand, the front door creaked open. The room quieted. Footsteps crossed the tile, measured, precise. The kind you learn over time, through years of discipline, not just habit. Polished black shoes, uniform pressed to perfection, a glint of silver at the collar. And then he appeared. Major General Raymond Cole. I didn't move. I didn't have to. He scanned the room briefly, then found me. And the moment our eyes met, the air shifted. He took 3 steps forward, stood tall, and brought his hand up in a crisp salute. "Lieutenant Colonel Whitaker," he said clearly, for everyone to hear. "Ma'am, it's an honor." The silence was thunderous. Someone dropped a fork. My cousin gasped. Lauren's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I stood, slow and calm, and returned the salute. "General Cole," I said. "Thank you for coming, sir." "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. Then he turned to the room, his voice carrying the weight of a man used to commanding silence. "This woman," he said, gesturing toward me, led one of the most critical counterintelligence responses we've seen in the last decade. Had she not flagged the anomaly in our internal network last month, we might have lost access to key infrastructure across 6 federal agencies. Murmurs rippled through the room. "She acted with speed, discretion, and brilliance," he continued. "The kind of excellence that doesn't just protect our country, it preserves the lives of everyone in this room." My mother looked pale. My father stared as if seeing me for the first time. Lauren. She looked like a person who'd built an entire identity on a stage that just collapsed beneath her feet. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just stood tall, letting the silence do what it does best. Fill the space where disbelief lives. General Cole reached into his pocket and handed me a small envelope. "This is your invitation to speak at the International Defense Security Summit next month. They requested you by name." I took it without breaking eye contact. "Thank you, sir." He nodded once, then turned to my parents. "You should be proud of her. I know I am." And with that, he excused himself, giving me a respectful nod before exiting as quietly as he'd come. The door closed. The silence lingered like fog. I sat back down, took another sip of water. No one spoke. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in that house. I felt seen. Not because of what he said, but because it didn't come from me. I didn't have to defend myself. I didn't have to list my worth or explain my choices. Someone else had spoken the truth. And now, they all had to live with it. No one spoke for a long time after General Cole left. The room felt like it had been drained of oxygen. The same people who had laughed minutes earlier now avoided my eyes. My mother busied herself collecting empty plates that didn't need collecting. My father cleared his throat, looked like he might say something, but didn't. And Lauren, she just disappeared. I didn't see where she went. 1 minute she was there, next she was gone, like a flame snuffed out by its own smoke. I sat for a moment longer, then stood. I could have made a speech. I could have said something pointed, something clever. But I wasn't there to rub salt into wounds. I was there to stop reopening my own. I walked toward the front hall. That house, once so big in my childhood memories, now felt small, like it had shrunk to fit the version of me they had insisted on believing in. But I wasn't her anymore. As I reached for my coat, I heard footsteps behind me. It was my mother. "Jenna?" she said softly. I turned. Her hands were clasped together, like she wasn't sure if she was about to scold me or beg for something. "I didn't know," she said. "About all that?" I nodded once. "No, you didn't." Her lips trembled. "Why didn't you tell us?" The question sat there between us like a trap, but I didn't flinch. Because when I was 13 and said I wanted to lead, you laughed. When I was 18 and got into West Point, you said it was a phase. When I called from deployment and no one picked up, I figured you'd decided the version of me you preferred was the one who never existed. She looked like she might cry, but I didn't comfort her. Not because I was angry, because I didn't need to carry that weight anymore. "I wasn't trying to shut you out," I said. "I was just tired of knocking on a locked door." She nodded barely. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I smiled, small, sincere, but not seeking. "I didn't come here for that," I said gently. She stepped aside. I opened the door. The night air was cold, crisp, clean. Outside, the street was quiet, peaceful. As I walked to my car, I heard another door open. Lauren, now standing at the top of the stairs. Her eyes were red, but she didn't say a word. Just watched me leave. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time in her life, she realized she'd built herself up by tearing me down. And maybe she didn't know how to stop. That wasn't mine to fix. I slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and let the silence settle. Not the suffocating kind I'd grown up with, but a soft, full silence. The kind that feels earned. My phone buzzed. A text from General Cole. "See you in D.C. Monday. Proud of you." I stared at it for a moment, then put the phone away. I didn't need the words. I already carried them in how I walked, how I led, how I chose to stay silent not out of fear, but out of knowing who I was. That night, as I pulled away from the curb, I realized something simple and powerful. I hadn't won anything. There was no victory lap, no dramatic exit music, no applause, just peace. Because the greatest revenge is no longer needing one. For a long time, I thought healing meant finally hearing the words I'd waited for since I was a teenager. That someone, my mother, my sister, anyone, would take my hands, look me in the eye, and say, "We were wrong. You were enough all along." But those words never came. And over time, I realized, maybe they don't need to. Healing isn't a grand reveal. It's not the applause after a speech or the headline after a win. Healing is quieter than that. It's walking into the same rooms that once made you feel small and not shrinking. It's sitting at the same table where you were once dismissed and no longer needing to be heard. When General Cole saluted me, yes, it changed the air in that house. But it didn't change me, because I already knew who I was before he ever stepped through that door. That moment didn't make me stronger. It confirmed what I had carried all along. I didn't leave with their approval. I didn't walk away triumphant. I walked away unburdened. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to rewrite the past and start building from exactly where you are. The truth is, I didn't need them to see me. I needed to stop waiting for it. And in that still perfect moment, leaving the house where I was never enough, I finally was. Not for them, for me.